We hear all the time that it's so important to accept people for who they are and how they are, yet is it really so simple to do that? Then there's the question of acceptance versus being too passive or being taken advantage of, or the difference between acceptance and, say, resignation or just giving up. In this video, I'm diving into all things acceptance and how mastering this concept or this capacity really frees us up. So as always, the structure of my videos, and this video starts with the psychology of the concept of acceptance and then taking it a little bit further into the metaphysical later on. So why is it so hard to accept people for how they are and who they are, and what can we do about it? So let's start firstly with the challenges in being accepting. So there are 3 areas of another person's functioning that we may struggle to accept: how they think, how they feel, or how they act. Start with thinking. Maybe we believe that someone's perceptions, their way of looking at life, looking at a situation, looking at the world are incorrect. Maybe they're too pessimistic, too much of a victim mentality, or just negative. Then there's the emotional reactions. Perhaps we feel that the way that another person's reacting or responding is illogical or over the top, exaggerated, or maybe their emotional response just lingers for far too long. And then there's the behavior. So perhaps we believe someone's behavior is too aggressive, or the opposite, too passive. Maybe they're too lazy, too pedantic, too obsessive. So all of these are just examples of different ways that another person's way of being or way of operating in the world can be very hard to accept for us. And why is it so hard to accept another human being for how they are? And the first is that the mind is a problem solver, and it wants to desperately solve any problems that it sees that are presented in any given moment. And this goes for any type of problem. And it's where we've allowed the human mind, or I guess become confused about the role the human mind plays in our everyday life. It's really been elevated to a status that it doesn't really, deserve to have in the sorts of problems that it seeks to solve. That it is great for the everyday practical things, as far as ensuring our food, water, basic needs are met, and our safety needs are met, and some level of planning for how the day will unfold, the week will unfold, dealing with practical issues. But when it comes to another human being, the conscious mind effectively gets a little bit out of its depth in trying to problem solve another person. So that's one factor that we have to take into account. Another is one of the reasons we have trouble accepting another human being is due to what it brings up in us, that it brings up uncomfortable thoughts and feelings inside of us. And this links again back to problem solving, that we want to problem solve the thoughts and feelings that are being activated in us and remove them, avoid them. When we feel something unpleasant, when we think something unpleasant, the natural inclination for a lot of us is to get rid of those thoughts and feelings. Now that works great for a physical threat. So if we're too close to the fire and we don't want to get burnt, avoidance is fantastic for physical threats. Or a car is coming at us down the road and we don't want to get hit by it. Again, fantastic to use avoidance in those situations. Best strategy. But is it really so simple, or is it really the best way of operating when it comes to our thoughts and feelings? Maybe avoiding what we're thinking and feeling isn't always the best way to deal with a situation. Because if we persistently try to get rid of those thoughts and feelings that are showing up that are uncomfortable for us in any given moment, then that could mean that we end up having to pull away from certain people or criticize, judge, whatever, another person, and that's only going to damage relationships. So that process, or that tendency towards what we refer to in psychology as experiential avoidance, is another factor that drives struggles in acceptance. And the third one is that another individual's way of being in the world prevents us from living the way we would like to live, living in line with our values, with our desires, with our wants. So, for example, if our partner is too lazy to get up off the couch and go for a walk, and you really love walking with another person, of course that person's behaviour, your partner's behaviour, is going to interfere with your desired way of living and operating in the world. Or your children aren't helping around the house, same situation, laziness perhaps, disinterest in contributing. Once again, that's interfering with the way that you would like to live your life and go about your day. So these are the sorts of factors that make it very hard to bring acceptance into our everyday lives, particularly when it comes to our relationships with others. And how can we look at the concept of acceptance and maybe define it? I choose to define it as allowing a situation or an individual to be as it is without judgment and without attempting to create change. And there's still going to be varying degrees as to the level of acceptance that we bring to our relationships, depending on the individual relationships. So, for example, coming back to the types of examples I was using just a moment ago with a partner versus your child, acceptance will play differing roles in those two types of relationships. Perhaps with a partner, trying to force change upon them because you like to have the kitchen sink wiped down every single time and have every bench pristine in the kitchen, and expecting that your partner will automatically follow along and comply with your request to have the kitchen that way, is not necessarily a healthy way of operating in the relationship, and accepting that they might not do it that way. And if you want to have the kitchen that level of cleanliness, then sure, you do it. But expecting that someone else change for you or your partner change for you in that situation may be debatable. I'm not saying in relationships that we don't make little modifications, and if our partners are willing to make those modifications, fine. But if the other individual is struggling to remember, it's not that they're intentionally trying to spite you by not doing things the way you would like them to be done, perhaps acceptance can come to bear in that sort of situation and save a lot of conflict, a lot of drama. Whereas the case of parenting a child, where they're refusing to contribute to the running of a household, asserting yourself and requesting that the child, let's say it's a teenager, gets up and removes the crockery from their bedroom or does the washing up, something along those lines, and expecting that they always do it immediately as soon as you request that, and knowing that they will, in likelihood, complete the task at some point. Obviously, if they're not going to complete the chore, then continuing to push with the request is going to be appropriate. But this line of accepting that maybe they don't like being told what to do immediately, and there is that resistance, but when they're given the space to settle into the request and come back to it in their own time, you still get the same sort of outcome, provided it's still done in a time frame, of course, that works within your family context. So there is this delicate balance here between taking action and being assertive in relationships with others, and when acceptance comes to play a role, and accepting that maybe it doesn't have to be exactly the way that you want it to be within your relationships with others. And if we get the balance wrong, we tend to get more resistance from others. So if there's a sense that we are trying to change them too excessively, too persistently, we're likely to get a lot more resistance. And the other thing is, I guess, a detrimental side effect of constantly trying to change another person and not accept them for their quirks and their preferred ways of doing things is that their self-worth becomes potentially damaged. That by constantly seeking to change them, they feel that they're somehow not good enough and not worthy, and this can linger with them. Not everyone, but certainly some individuals, and our children and teens in those formative years are certainly more susceptible to taking on those sorts of perceptions and being affected in that way when we try to change them too excessively. So again, it's a fine line, and I'm not saying it's an easy line to determine where action stops and where acceptance kicks in. And it'll be a dance throughout the day. Throughout any given day, there'll be moments of taking action and back to acceptance. And the other thing to take into account here is that by not bringing acceptance to bear in the appropriate moments, we are creating additional suffering for ourselves. So for example, let's say it's the end of the day and you're trying to get to sleep and you're still replaying in your mind all the things that frustrated you about someone in your life, that the fact that they didn't do what you asked them to do when they did it, or that they've got habits or traits, etc. There's no action that can be taken at this time when you're laying in bed attempting to go to sleep. So that suffering is completely unnecessary, that you're not doing yourself any favors, and accepting in that moment, the day's over, there's nothing I can be doing in this particular moment, and hopefully being able to allow the mind to come to rest rather than struggling against the situation in your mind for longer than what you really need to. And one tool I really find helpful to share with people around acceptance is the idea that acceptance lies on a spectrum, on a scale. I'm not trying to suggest that acceptance is like a light switch. Either you're accepting or you're not. There's a big range of acceptance on a scale that I would say varies from complete struggle or complete resistance against the situation, against a person's behavior or way of being, and 100% or complete acceptance of a situation or a person. And I think we rarely get all the way to 100% acceptance. It is very rare, in fact, that we land all the way down in 100% acceptance, particularly when it's a bit undesirable, the situation or the person's behavior, etc., that we're dealing with. And the mind will still have tendencies to resist that from time to time. And so if you think of it on a scale, it's more like a dance up and down this line where you will drift towards resistance and struggle against how a person might be behaving, thinking, feeling, and or other situations in your life that you have trouble accepting, and then realizing that you're doing that you're resisting, that you're not bringing an accepting attitude, and returning towards acceptance again. And that will be a dance, will be a movement up and down this scale, potentially over and over again. But the more that you do it, the more you catch yourself and deliberately take yourself towards acceptance. It becomes more of a habit, becomes more of a skill, and more of your autopilot to find your way back to acceptance quicker. Another really helpful or powerful question that I think helps with acceptance is to ask the question, is there anything that I can do or am willing to do right now in this moment to affect this situation, this relationship with this person, etc.? And if the answer is no, there is nothing that you can do now in this given moment that you're either can do or are willing to do. And the willing to do would be because you could see that it is only going to inflame the situation, that it's unlikely to make anything better by taking the action. Then the choice to move towards acceptance flows naturally from this answer of, well, no, there's nothing I can do about it, so, or I'm willing to do about it. So perhaps acceptance is the best option. I like to use the metaphor of the Chinese finger trap, one of these, to remind my clients, sometimes use it myself as a mental reminder to think about it. I don't have to necessarily have one of these. If you haven't seen how they work before, the concept is that as soon as you pull on the trap, when you find yourself in the trap and start pulling, you make it worse by resisting, which is a bit of a paradox because our natural instincts are to fight against the situation we don't like. And in this situation, it's actually better to go with it. Now, when I push in, whilst that is the method for getting out, by pushing in, I'm using this metaphor more to indicate that pushing in is preferred to pulling. So if my fingers are going to be in this trap, what's better for me? Is it better for me to resist and to make it more uncomfortable? My fingers are being squeezed a lot more as soon as I resist. Or is it better for me to just go with it? And when I go with it, it's not as uncomfortable. Yeah, it's not desirable. My fingers are still in this trap. They're not out. But the discomfort is less. I'm making far less discomfort for myself when I go with it. And that's what I like about this metaphor of the Chinese finger trap. It's a real nice practical example of how going with something and not resisting. And in today's topic, we're referring to another person's behaviour, thoughts, feelings. If we can't really do anything about it in a given moment, or it's only going to inflame things, then maybe remember the Chinese finger trap. I'd also encourage any of you that aren't familiar with acceptance and commitment therapy and might be interested in learning a bit about that particular model, which I find is a really powerful psychology model for bringing acceptance into various areas of our lives, including our thoughts, our feelings as well, our inner experience, then maybe look into acceptance and commitment therapy. Russ Harris has some quite good books, including The Happiness Trap. It's been around for a while, but I still find it's quite a great introduction to that model. So what about if we go a bit deeper, a bit broader, and look at this concept of acceptance? When I was doing my automatic writing this morning to figure out what I was going to speak to today in this video, acceptance came up alongside surrender. And to be honest, I hadn't really thought of putting the two next to each other before. And when I reflected on it, wrote about it a bit this morning, I can see how maybe surrender could be considered an extension of acceptance. That word surrender is used a lot in the world of spirituality and personal growth, this sense of maybe trusting in something bigger and wiser and unconditionally supportive at play beyond our human selves. So I see I see surrender as bringing acceptance plus this real deep trusting of things playing out exactly as they're supposed to be playing out, which is hard to do because, again, coming back to the conscious mind, we've elevated it into this position where we feel we need to be in control, or the mind thinks it needs to be in control and predicting and anticipating and planning everything that's going on. When in reality, that's not what our conscious mind is supposed to be doing. We've overburdened it. We've given it too much to do. And I really love Bashar's teachings in stating that we are so unconditionally supported by creation itself, that we are given the free will to actually choose things that aren't aligned with our highest purpose and highest self. That's how much creation loves us, the universe, the multiverse, whatever you want to call it, that we are given this absolute freedom to choose things that even aren't in our best interests, because we are loved that much by the universe that we would never be stopped in creating whatever we want to create, whether that be the good, the bad, and everything in between. But all the time, creation, our higher selves, are trying to guide us back to surrendering into the fact that we're not supposed to be in control of everything here. And it's hard. I'm not trying to make it sound easy. So how can we bring more surrender into our relationships? For starters, we can trust that the person that we're struggling with is exactly at the point that they're meant to be on their journey. That we're not there to necessarily correct their course, put them back on track. Certainly not there to walk the path for them. So, surrendering to that, allowing that knowing to wash over you, that they are at the stage that they're meant to be at. And yes, if there's a gift they can take from you, from some word of wisdom that you might offer, or some example that you might set to them, of course. But offering someone a gift and them not taking it is completely out of your control. You can't control whether someone takes anything from you, even if you believe that you might be able to help them. And I fall into this trap, still somewhat frequently with my own kids. All the wisdoms that I've been fortunate enough to gather over the years, and now that they're teenagers, they're making their own minds up, and they're not necessarily completely ready to hear some of the things that I think could really enhance their lives. And my problem-solving mind still does it though, from time to time. It sees an area of struggle potentially for them and seeks to bring in this perspective, this wisdom, and they're just not necessarily open to it. They're not ready for it, and I'm led back to first acceptance and then surrender, trusting that they are on the path that they're meant to be on, and divine timing is at play. Another aspect of surrender is to trust that there are challenges being thrown up for you that are in divine patterning as well. That when we get triggered off by people maybe not behaving the way that we would like them to behave or think or feel, we are having our parts activated, our parts that want control, our parts that judge, our parts that criticize, our parts that care, whatever those parts are that are potentially out of balance, they are being brought into our focus in these moments so that we can look at them. So there's basically a gift in these situations where we feel that we are struggling to accept another individual for who they are or how they are. There's something inside of us that's being activated here and is calling us out to bring love and understanding and support to these parts so that they can perhaps function in a more harmonious and balanced way within our beings. Another area of surrender within relationships is trusting that the answer will come to us as to how to proceed if we just lean into our intuitive guidance. My last video was on intuition. If you are interested in looking up that video. But I will say here that if we're stuck with how to operate within a relationship with a particular individual, and I'm probably referring here more to people that we have a choice as to whether we remain in relationship with them. So yes, a relationship that might be in trouble, that we may be doubting, a friendship that we're considering distancing ourselves from. So not so much as a parent, because presumably we will maintain those responsibilities to our children to a certain age, and even if we're really disapproving of their behaviour, there are exceptions always, of course. If things are going way too far, then we may need to distance ourselves from our children, and that's completely understandable in certain cases. But yeah, I'm more referring to these situations where we're on the edge of, what do I do here? Do I remain or do I not? And surrendering into this knowing that your intuition, that the signs, that the guidance will show up if we just get the mind out of the way and allow the answers to come to us as to how to proceed in that relationship. Surrender is all about trusting in the natural flow of life, and that we're supported by this higher consciousness, by the universe, by life itself. And even though it's not easy, because the mind loves being in control and fears not having it, which again highlights the importance of doing the parts work, working on these aspects that struggle with not being in control and struggle with acceptance. But when we can really step into this space of surrender, everything gets so much easier. Maybe not initially, but in time. There's a good reason why the serenity prayer has been so useful to so many on their healing journeys, in that it encourages us to accept the things we can't change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so I encourage you to keep moving in the direction of acceptance when it's clearly being called for. And the relationships in your life will no doubt improve when you can find acceptance in the moments that it's needed. And if you choose to then enhance that acceptance with an absolute trust in creation, and know that creation is constantly trying to support you, surrender will emerge naturally.